This is a walkthrough of microeconomics, Echo 201 for Southern New Hampshire University, Module 6 quiz. I'm going to walk through a few of the questions that have a little bit more, present a little bit more challenge because they have graphs. So the first question, profit maximization and loss minimization. Module 6 focuses on monopolies and competitive markets. So this first one, I'm going to reset it to make sure we try another version. There we go. Lagat Green is a monopoly beer producer and distributor operating in the hypothetical economy of Lightington. Assume that Lagat Green is not able to price discriminate, and so it sells its beer to all the customers at the same price per bottle. The following graphs gives the marginal cost, marginal revenue, average total cost, and demand curves that Lagat Green faces for beer in Lightington. So the first thing we know for monopolies is that the profit maximization quantity is found where marginal cost, this orange line, intersects marginal revenue. So the first thing we can find is that this profit maximization quantity is at this intersection. So we know this from what we've read, and that from here we can find the price that the monopolist can charge by looking at the demand curve for his firm. So the first part of the graph wants you to place the black point, so the plus symbol, on the graph to indicate the profit maximizing price and quantity for Lagat Green. So if I get my spot, I know this is the profit maximizing quantity. It's 1, and I'm going to pull it up and find the corresponding price on the demand curve for that quantity of 1. In my case, it's $2. It might be different in your example, but from a graphic, this is how you find it. If you click on it, now I know that at a quantity of 1,000 bottles of beer, they charge a price of $2. They can charge. The limit, the constraints, is the demand curve. Now it says if Lagat Green is making a profit, use the green rectangle, the triangle symbols, to shade in the area representing its profit. On the other hand, if he's suffering a loss, use the purple rectangle. Now, just out of looking at it, I can see that the average total cost curve is above entirely the demand curve, or almost entirely. And especially at this point, the corresponding average total cost is higher. It's up here close to $3. It's above the $2.50. So I know for a fact that the beer company is actually making a loss because the price it can charge is below the average total cost per item, right? So for every unit it sells, it's losing the amount of money that it can charge the price and the difference between what the cost to produce that unit is. So I'm going to drag the purple rectangle, and I'm going to place it right here. And I'm just going to create this rectangle. And I'm going to drag it up to where it touches the average total cost. So that is how I'm going to determine my loss. It's going to be the difference between the average total cost of each unit minus the price minus the average total cost times the quantity, right? And that is going to determine my loss. So I know it's going to be a loss. Suppose Lagat Green charges $2 per bottle, which is exactly what we had found as the equilibrium. So you kind of already had your answer when you retry another attempt. You can take a peek to know if you've placed your plus button in your plus in the right spot. Your study partner Adrian says that because Lagat Green is a monopoly with market power, it should charge the higher price of $2.25 per bottle in order to increase its profit. So it could charge $2.25. Now at the $2.25 mark, the quantity on the demand curve is a little lower, if you notice, because although the monopolist has market power, it doesn't have unlimited market power. It is still has the constraint of the demand curve and the willingness of the consumers to buy, right? Each quantity that is sold. So completing the following table to determine whether Adrian is correct. At the price of $2, what is the quantity demanded? It's 1,000 bottles of beer. So we're going to find 1,000 on this drop down. what is our total revenue? We know total revenue is price times the quantity. So if we do $2 times 2,000 bottles, it's going to be $2,000. So we're going to write $2,000 in here. The total cost. What is the total cost? Now the total cost came up here at about $2.75, the average total cost. So the total cost can be the average total cost times the quantity. So we're going to do 2.75 times 1,000. That equals 2,750. Let's see if we can find it. Here it is on the drop down. So what is my profit? It's total revenue minus total cost. In this case, it's going to be a negative number of minus 750. Now let's move to the 225 scenario. What if the price was a little higher? At 225, what is the quantity demanded on the curve? It looks like it's somewhere in between 0.5 and 1,000. So I'm going to say 750. What is the total revenue? It's going to be 2.25 times 750 equals 1,607.5. What is going to be the total cost? So at a quantity of 750, so we're going here, we kind of have to make a kind of an estimate here. 750 going up here. I'm coming to 325, I'm thinking. And you know, if it's difficult to figure it out, you can also like use this plus point and say, for example, do it 750. When does it reach at 325? Just remember that you need to put it back where it was before, but you can use the plus sign to find your spot. So we said 325 at 750. 3.25 times 750 equals 2437. Doesn't actually. 3.25 times 750. Okay, so I couldn't find the number in the drop down. So if I can't find the number I'm coming up with in the drop down, I know I made a mistake. So I looked it up again. I dragged the dot and actually intersects the average total cost at a price of 350. So if I do 750 times 350, it comes to 350 times 750, 2625, and I have the 2625, 2,625. Now I can calculate my profit, and it's 1,687.5 minus 1687.5 minus 2625 equals minus 937.5. Now I need to remember to put this back where it was. Otherwise, I'll get an incorrect answer when I go get my grade. So it is not true that the beer producer can charge a higher price because they're monopolists. They cannot charge a price. They always are limited to that demand curve. So if they charge a higher price, the quantity will decrease in such a manner that their profit will decrease. So in this case, it will not increase total revenue to increase the price. Given the early information, Adrian is not correct in the assertion that Legat Green should charge $2.25 per bottle, because we've just seen at $2.25 there's a bigger loss. Suppose that a technological innovation decreases Legat's green cost so that it now faces the marginal cost and the average total cost given on the following graph. So we have a different marginal cost and a different average total cost thanks to technological innovation. Now we want to find out if they're still having a loss or if there is a profit. Again, we need to get our black dot line and find the profit maximizing quantity, which is going to be down here where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. We drag it up to our demand curve, and I can see it's at 1.25 in quantity, so 1,250 thousands of bottles of beer at a price of $1.25. Now look at this. This section is above my average total cost. What does it mean? That the price I'm receiving is more than what it's costing me to produce each unit of bottles. So I know I'm going to have a profit, and I need to identify the profit area. So I'm going to drag it right on the demand there. So I'm going to have the bottom portion is going to be on my average total cost curve. The top is the price, and it's going to be this difference. It's going to be the area of this rectangle that identifies my profit. So let's grade it and see if we got it correctly. Yes. So this is how you solve these graphs. You just have to add the graded area. It takes a little patience to move it with the mouse. And as I said, you can use this plus button to help you fill in this table, just because it can be a little confusing to find accurately the quantity and the price. But put that plus back where it was at the profit maximizing quantity and price when you're done, so that when you get the grade, it's going to be accurate. Moving on to question number 2. Now, if you have already completed these questions, just skip forward. I'm not going through all of the questions because I'm going to skip the questions that are merely conceptual and just focus on the one with the graphs, because those are the most challenging. If there's any of those, then you can fast forward till you get to the question you're interested in if you don't want to listen to the whole video. So consider the weekly market for gyros, gyros on a popular neighborhood close to campus. Suppose this market is operating in long-run competitive equilibrium with many gyros vendors in the neighborhood. So we know we're looking at the long-run competitive equilibrium, each offering basically the same gyros. Due to the structure of the market, the vendors act as price takers, and each individual vendor has no market power. We know in competitive markets, the firms are price takers. The price is imposed. They don't have any power on the price. The following graph displays the supply, where the supply equals the marginal cost curve. And we saw that in the long run, the supply curve is the portion of the marginal cost curve that is above the average total cost curve. And the demand curves in the weekly market for gyros. So this is the market, the whole market's demand and supply equilibrium. Place the black point on the graph to indicate the market price and quantity that will result from competition. So nobody has market power. The price and the quantity is literally what we have learned with supply and demand equilibrium, where supply intersects to demand curve. So we're going to place it there. Now assume that one of the gyros vendors successfully petitions the Neighborhood Development Board to obtain exclusive rights to sell gyros in the neighborhood. So now we're not in a competitive market anymore. This market has turned into a competition. This firm buys up all the rest of the gyro food trucks in the area, begins to operate as a monopoly. Let's assume that this change does not affect demand and that the marginal cost curve of the new monopoly corresponds exactly to the supply curve from the previous graph. So the marginal cost curve has remained the same. And this is the new assumptions that we have. Now place the black point on the following graph to indicate the profit maximizing price and quantity of a monopolist. So we know that the maximizing quantity, profit maximizing quantity, is where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. So it would be here the quantity, but how much can the monopolist charge? It's going to charge the price on the demand curve that corresponds to that quantity. So at a quantity of 90 gyros, the price it can charge is $3. Now consider the welfare effects that results from the industry operating as a competitive market versus a monopoly. And consider this, if the market was a competition, this would be the quantity, 100, it would be 150 for a price of $2. But now that we've moved to a competition, we sell only 90 for a price of $3. The market has shrunk. It has become a smaller market, right? So that missing portion of quantity sold and that higher price, those are the welfare costs, the welfare effects of a monopoly versus a competitive market. So on the monopoly graph, use the black points, the plus symbol, to shade the area that represent the loss of welfare or deadweight loss caused by a monopoly. So we're going to get this plus, and we're going to drag it here. And this is the deadweight loss, right? the difference between the 150 that could have potentially been had we been in a competitive market to the 90 that is because it's a monopoly, from the two, and there was the $2, but now we're the buyer is paying $3, right? So we're paying a higher price. So this triangle is going to represent the deadweight loss, and the loss in total surplus, basically, from the market. If you think about it, the total surplus originally was all this big triangle here. But now the total surplus of the market is going to be without this gray shaded area. So there's going to be less total surplus because of the monopoly. The deadweight loss occurs when a market is controlled by a monopoly because the resulting equilibrium is different from the efficient equilibrium that happens in competitive markets. In the following table, enter the price and the quantity that would arise in a competitive market. So we're going to go, the price and quantity was 150 for $2. So the price was $2 and the quantity was 150. With a monopoly, the price is $3 and the quantity is only 90. Given the summary table of the two different market structures, you can infer that in general the price is higher under a monopoly and the quantity is lower under a monopoly, right? It's higher, $3 instead of $2. The quantity is lower, it's 90 instead of 150. So let's grade it. And this is the result for this question. Let's move on to question number 3, natural monopoly analysis. So a natural monopoly happens when there's firms that can produce the output for the whole market more efficiently on their own than if the production was split up among several firms. Think of water distribution. Think of usually electricity distribution. Utilities in general tend to be natural monopolies. The following graph gives a demand curve for water services in the fictional town of Steamship Springs. The graph also shows the marginal revenue, the marginal cost, the average total cost curves for the local water company, a natural monopolist. Now, your graph might look a little different or it might look exactly the same. But on the following graph, use the black point, the plus symbol, to indicate the profit maximizing price and quantity for this natural monopolist. So don't be confused by the natural monopolist wording. In the same case, we're going to find the production quantity where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. And then we're going to find the price on the demand curve. So it's going to be up here at $24 per 100 cubic feet for a quantity of 400 cubic feet. So that is the profit maximizing price and quantity for this natural monopoly. Look how much above that average total cost curve is. Which of the following statements are true about this natural monopoly? So every statement you can find the answer by looking at this graph, if they're true or not. The water company must own a scarce resource. That could be true. So we've answered the first part. We found this point. Now let's go answer all of these. Oh, I think I already graded it. So the true ones was that it is more efficient on the cost side for one producer to exist, and the water company is experiencing economies of scale. So these are more conceptual parts of the question that you can answer, even referring to the textbook. And if you're unsure, you can always open the textbook on the side, click on the full book, and you can scroll down and go find monopolies. For example, natural monopolies, and go look. Economies of scale as a cause of a monopoly, right? The average total cost curve is always like that. So you know that the water companies is experiencing economies of scale. You can go find is the company owns a scarce resources. That is not necessarily true. It might not be owning a scarce resource. And it is more efficient on the cost side for one producer to exist in the market. That is almost the definition of a natural monopoly, so you know that to be true. And it's right here. An industry in a natural monopoly is when a single firm can supply a good or service to the entire market at a lower cost than could two or more firms. That's the definition of natural monopoly. So you could also help yourself finding the answer by getting the book and looking at it. The next one is without government regulation, natural monopolies can earn a profit in the short run. That is true without government regulation. Sometimes the government intervene, imposes some price constraints on the natural monopolist, which might affect its profits. So we can close this and we can continue to the next question. And I'm not going to answer question number 4 because it's entirely conceptual. And I'm going to skip to question number 5. So question number 5. So Citrus Scooters is a company that manufactures electric scooter in a monopolistically competitive market. The following graph shows the demand curve, marginal revenue curve, marginal cost curve, and average total cost. So now we have a monopolistically competitive market. So we're not a monopoly, not a perfect competition, somewhere in the middle, right? And we know that monopolistic competition in that market, we determine the profit maximization quantity, always by finding the intersection of marginal costs and marginal revenue, and finding the price on the demand curve in the same way that monopolists did. That's why we call it monopolistic competition. Place the black point on the graph to indicate the short-run profit maximizing price. We're talking of the short-run profit maximizing price and quantity for this monopolistic competitive company. And then use the green rectangle to shade the area representing the company's profit or loss. It's not said that there's going to be a profit. Just looking at this, I can tell you that it's not a profit because the price is going to be below the average total cost curve. So I'm going to find the quantity. I go here. Marginal cost intersects marginal revenue at a quantity of 125. And then I'm going to drag it up to the demand curve for a price of 275. So now that I figured out the price and the quantity, the profit maximizing quantity, and the price that the monopolistically competitive company can charge, which is 275, I can determine if it's making a profit or a loss. And I know that it's not going to make a profit. So I'm going to put it up here because the price is below. Actually, I did too much. The average total cost. I think I can go one more. What is that about it? Yep. It's below the average total cost, which is 325 by the look of this graph. So given the profit maximizing choice of output and price, Citrus Scooter is earning a negative profit, which means that there are more sellers in the industry relative to the long run equilibrium amount. Why are there more sellers? Because we're making a loss. So in a monopolistic competitive market, if there's a loss, some sellers will exit. They have incentive to leave the market. And as they leave the market, the price will be able to increase. And as that price increases, the market will reach an equilibrium. And it is called monopolistically competitive because in that instance, it looks like a competitive market in the long run because it will reach that profit of 0. When it reaches that profit of 0, there's no incentive for firms to enter or exit the market. And in the long run, monopolistically competitive companies are going to earn that profit of 0. So now consider the long run in which scooter manufacturers are free to enter and exit the market. So in the long run, I thought this was a little tricky in the sense that when we enter and exit the market, there's going to be an increase in the number of sellers, right? Or a decrease in the number of sellers if companies exit the market. And so that increase and decrease in the number of sellers would cause the demand curve, the supply curve to shift for the market. But that affects the demand curve for the companies, right? For the companies that stay in the market, because now they are splitting the demand between more or less companies depending on entry or exit. So it says here, show the possible effects of these free entry and exit by shifting the demand curve for a typical individual producer of scooters. So don't be fooled or don't get confused. Here on the top, we're looking at we're looking at the company's profit maximization, quantity, and price. But now, when market sellers enter and exit, the market supply will shift, but it will cause a change in the demand curve for the individual firm. So what's going to happen? We said that there's a loss. Firms are going to exit the market. So there's going to be less sellers. If there's less sellers, the demand curve will increase, right? Because now we have more customers that we can have. When there's an increase of the demand curve, we make it shift to the right. So this is what you would have had to do here, is identify the shift of the individual producer's demand curve when there are less sellers, when there's sellers leaving the market. Which of the following statements are true for both monopolistically competitive markets and monopoly market? So this question is worded in a way that wants you to identify what are the common features of a monopolistically competitive market and a monopoly, right? So common features would be price equals average total cost, not for a monopoly market. So this would not be true. Firms are not price takers, which happens in a perfectly competition. That's true, right? They are price makers. The price is above the marginal cost. That is completely true for both markets. And that is why that there's that inefficiency, that social inefficiency in monopolistic competitive markets and monopolies. The firms earn zero profit in the long run. This is only true for monopolistically competitive market. It is not true for monopolies, so we're not going to select that. So let's see. And we got everything correct. So I'm going to skip question number 6 because it's entirely conceptual. Again, if question number 6 was challenging, open the book. The role of brand names in advertising. We know we're talking of monopolistic competition when we're talking of branding. So we can go here, click on monopolistic competition, advertising, right? So we can go look at the part of the chapter that we're interested, find the information, which of the following statements about expenditures in advertising is true. Find the answer by reading the chapter. So I'm not going to do this question because you can find the answers quite easily and it's not challenging from a graphical perspective. Now I'm going to continue to question number 7. Now question number 7. So let's work on this question. Monopoly pricing and price elasticity on demand. So if the demand is inelastic and a monopolist raises its price, the total revenue would do what? If the demand is inelastic, you raise the price, then total revenue will increase. The total cost would decrease. Why? Because as we increase the price, we're going to decrease the quantity, right? Look at the demand curve. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. So the total cost would decrease. What does this mean is that there's an opportunity to increase the profit because the profit, total revenue increases, total cost decreases, I can increase my profit. Well, monopolists are going to produce at their profit maximizing quantity, which means that if they're able to raise the price and increase profits once more, then they will continue increasing that price until they are maximizing the profit. They reach the top. But what does this also mean? It means that the demand is inelastic only in a portion of the demand curve. As the price rises, the demand becomes more and more elastic. So this means that the monopolist is not going to produce in the section of the curve that is inelastic, because in that section of the curve, it can increase its prices and increase its profits. So it's going to keep doing that until it reaches the section of the curve, of the demand curve, where it cannot increase it anymore. You know, like we did the example of the beer company, could not increase by those 25 cents because the profit was going to be more negative, right? The loss was going to be greater. So it's not going to do that. It's going to stop at some point, but in the meantime, it's going to increase the price as much as it can. It's going to get to that profit maximizing quantity and price. This means that a monopolist will never produce a quantity at which the demand curve is inelastic, because it means it can increase the price and it can continue increasing the profit. Using the purple segment to indicate the portion of the demand curve that is inelastic. So we know the bottom portion of the demand curve is inelastic, but up to what point? Where is the demand curve unit elastic? The demand curve is going to be unit elastic where the marginal revenue intersects the zero, where the marginal revenue is zero. So if we point this here, and we find this point that is $5 at a quantity of 5, then we can identify the elastic portion of the demand curve. And then we use the black point to show the quantity and price that maximizes total revenue. So that is also going to be our point that maximizes the total revenue. And we're going to move on. So the next question, this was 7, is going to be 8. So question 8 is a little longer because there's 3 parts of it. Monopolistic competition, again, there's a graphical picture, profit maximization, welfare effects. So we're going to examine different parts of monopolistic competition. The Crest is one firm of many in the market of toothpaste, which is in the long run equilibrium. So we know in the long run equilibrium, the profit is 0, which means the price equals the average total cost in the market. Indicate which of the following graphs accurately reflects Crest's demand curve: marginal revenue curve, average total cost curve, and marginal cost curve. So as I said, in the long run, monopolistic competition has 0 profits, right? To have 0 profits, it means that your price equals your average total cost at that specific quantity, because then you have that profit of 0, right? The cost of producing is equal to the cost, to the price. That total revenue equals total cost. So which ones of these 2 curves represent that? The A or the B? The A, average total cost, is above demand at the point of intersection of marginal cost and marginal revenue. So let's say about this spot. So we know there's a loss on this one. On B, there is 0, because if we draw a line, if we could draw a line up here, we're going to get the point where the demand is tangent to the average total cost. So they're the same. So this B would be the answer to the long run equilibrium for monopolistic competition. And if you're unsure of that, again, I encourage you to open the textbook, go find monopolistic competition, and you can find long run equilibrium, and you can just go see what does it look like. What does as in a competitive market, the price equals average total cost, P equals ATC, and this is where this happens in B, that the price equals the average total cost. And you could probably see, we can find average total cost, how it's a tangent to the demand. It compares monopolistically competitive firms to perfectly competitive firms. Just to show you, the perfectly competitive firm demand curve is horizontal versus the monopolistic competition is a downsloping demand curve. But this is the point for the long run equilibrium. So we can close that again and go back to our question. There we go. So B was the correct answer. So we grade step 1. And that was correct. So we can go to the next step, profit maximization. So now we're moving forward. We have another graph. We saw before where the long run equilibrium for monopolistic competition sits. The following graph shows Crest demand curve, marginal revenue curve, average total cost curve, and marginal cost curves. Use the black point, so the plus symbol, to indicate Crest's profit maximizing output at price. How do we know which one it is? We get the black point. We know that this is the profit maximizing quantity, where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. So we can start from here and then we can drag it up, right, to the demand curve. Well, in this point of the demand curve, this price is on the demand curve and equals the average total cost curve. Now we know if the price is equal to the average total cost, what does it mean? It means that the profit is 0. It's not negative, it's not positive. So true or false, Crest's profit is negative. It's false because the profit is 0. So let's grade it. And that was correct. It was false. Let's go to the next step. And maybe your question is posed differently, so your answer could be true. So pay attention to how the question is worded, because sometimes they change it just to randomize the question. Next step, the welfare effects. So we know that there's a social inefficiency in monopolistic competition because they produce at a quantity that is less than their capacity to produce, right? That there's excess capacity in a monopolistic competitive market. So the rest of this question is more of a conceptual. To identify consumer surplus, deadweight loss caused by monopolistic competition. Indicate which of the labeled areas represent consumer surplus. We know that the consumer surplus is the area, the triangle below the demand curve, but above the price paid, right? It's basically that section of demand that would be willing to pay a higher price, but is lucky enough to pay this lower price, right? So there's a surplus. There's a benefit they're gaining. So Z and Y would be the consumer surplus. What is the deadweight loss? So the deadweight loss is the quantity that is produced by the monopolistic competitive company versus the efficient quantity of production. Now, we've learned in the cost of production that the efficient quantity of production is where marginal cost intersects the average total cost. And when we're looking at the market, the efficient level of production for a market is where demand intersects supply, right? That is the perfect quantity price that is imposed by the price system, by everybody voluntarily entering the market and by everybody being a price taker rather than a price maker. So we know that the deadweight loss is going to be the W area, which I have already marked here, is the area with the W. So we've answered these two sections, and those were correct. And then which of the following describes what would happen to the firm and to Crest customers if they had to produce at the efficient level, right? What would happen? Crest would earn a negative profit. And let's go look what would be the efficient level. Is the price, see it all is going to be below the average total cost, because at this point of intersection where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, the price equals the average total cost. And then from there, the price is always going to be below the average total cost for the next section of the demand curve. So at any quantity that is greater than the marginal cost, where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue, the firm is going to experience a loss. There's not going to be a profit. So the correct answer would be that Crest would earn a negative profit. There would be no consumer surplus simply because there would be no market for that firm, which it would exit the firm. So if we continue here, you can go to the next question. Let me try another version of it to move on. So now we're looking at perfectly competitive market and trying to compare it to a monopolistically competitive market. In the long run, we know that they both earn zero profit, but in what way and how does it differ? So it says on the following graph, use the black point to show the profit maximizing output and price for a typical firm operating in a monopolistically competitive environment. We're going to get the plus, find the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, and draw it up to the demand curve. And here we see that the demand curve is a tangent at average total cost. They're the same. Where price equals average total cost, we know that there's that zero profit. And this is where monopolistically competitive firms will produce in the long run, right? Now it says one day we find out that the peanut butter in Nutville, they're all identical, and it's not really a monopolistically competitive market, but it's a perfect competition. Where would the perfectly competitive market produce? Now we know that the perfectly competitive market and the firm in this case, because we're looking at a firm's graph, would produce where average total cost intersects marginal cost. That is the efficient level of production where average total cost is at its minimum. So we're going to drag this star and we're going to place it right here where average total cost is at its minimum and it intersects marginal cost. Which of the following statements are true for a typical firm in the market given the transition from monopolistic competition to perfect competition? The average total cost decreases. So we went to, and it's true because for in a perfectly competitive market, we're looking at the minimum, at the lowest average total cost. That is where a perfectly competitive market produces. The marginal cost increases. So here we had a marginal cost that was lower, and as it went up, right, to intersect the average total cost, so that is also true, the profit increases. Well, the profit has remained the same, right? We still have that zero profit in a perfect competition and a monopolistic competition in the long run. So that is not true. The quantity remains unchanged, and that is untrue because we have a greater quantity. The price has increased. That is not true because it actually has gone down from a monopolistic competition. So it should be only these two. And that is correct. Now these change for every question, so you won't be able to copy like what I'm doing in here simply because they might be a different question. So for question number 10, we're going to look at competitive supermarkets and compare them a bit to monopolies. In a small town, there's many supermarkets, so we can use the black point to show the competitive price and quantity in this market. So this is going to be the intersection of marginal cost and demand. So this is the market, not the individual firm. And we know marginal costs, the supply curve is usually horizontal in the long term in a competitive market. And at the intersection of marginal cost and demand, for the market, there's going to be the level of production and consumption. So this is the price. Now, when we look at consumer surplus, we know it's the whole area above the price, but below the demand curve. So we can drag this. Now, producer surplus in a competitive market actually doesn't exist in this case because the price equals the marginal cost. So there isn't a lower price, a higher price actually, that is above the marginal cost at which they're selling. They're selling at exactly the price that equals marginal cost at their willingness to sell, right? And so there's going to be no producer surplus. So this was a little bit of a trick question. We're going to ask you to shade that producer surplus that really doesn't exist. So we're not going to shade anything. Now let's imagine that these supermarkets become a monopoly. They combine and they become one big chain. Now we're looking at a monopoly, right? So what is the monopoly outcome? Marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. We're going to find that quantity, and then we're going to drag it up all the way to the demand curve to determine the price. Now what is the consumer surplus? It's still the area above the price, but below the demand curve. So we're going to drag it, and there's actually two, because there's that line splitting it, so you have to drag it twice. What is going to be the producer surplus? The producer surplus is the profit of the monopolist. So it's going to be the price it charges minus that marginal cost, right? And then the deadweight loss. What is the deadweight loss? We went from a greater quantity to a smaller quantity, and so it's going to be this area here where there's been a loss, right? A shrinking of the market. Now, which of the following statements is true about the changes that occur after the supermarket merge? With the change, the total surplus falls, right? Now we had this big area of total surplus, and now the total surplus is a little smaller because we have that deadweight loss. The market price remains unchanged. That is not true. The market went up. The price went up with a monopoly. So that is not true. We're not going to mark it. Consumer surplus falls, and that is true. Look at the green area, how small it is compared to this. So it falls. The market quantity decreases, and it's true. With a monopoly, we have less quantity. Producer surplus remains unchanged. That is not true because the producer surplus did not exist in a competitive market, and now it's the square indicated over here. So let's grade it, and you'll find that all the answers were correct. So this is Module 6 quiz. I might prepare a video for Module 7 quiz if I have time tomorrow morning, but look through this. As I said, use this really convenient feature to help you find the answers. There's a table of contents. It's easy to navigate and find which market structure you're referring to, and to find that, kind of help you find your answers. And so we go here. Well, I didn't answer all the questions, but I still scored a 99%, and I didn't even, I answered those. I just didn't go over them, but that's good. So if you have any questions, don't forget when you finish your assignment to do I'm done, grade assignment now. Yes, grade assignment. So you click that, and it generates your grade into the gradebook that will transfer to Brightspace. And this way in Brightspace, you'll know your accurate grade. Otherwise, you'll know it on Monday, because on Monday, it would automatically submit all your quizzes and generate the grades for all of them. So See you back for Module 7.